Sorry, chat. Everything is really slow. Oh no. What have I done? Why is everything that I tried to do? I have no idea why my computer started singing Christmas music, but it did. Alright, hold on. Oh, what terror have I wrought upon this world? Oh, what have I done? Okay. Oh my god. Oh, I never thought this day would come. Okay. Hold on. I'm pulling up all this stuff. Shit. This one looks good. This one's from the book Lost in the Woods. Yo, Edgehead! This is from the book Lost in the Woods, Mysterious Stories from the Pennsylvania Mountains. And this one is called The Song of the Yellow Pine. In the backyard of my grandfather's house stood a magnificent yellow pine tree. How it escaped the loggers' axes, I'll never know. But there it stood, a lone survivor of the primeval forest. Yo, sassy. The quietest a woo. Shit. I lost my place. Alright, we'll just start from the beginning. It's the Song of the Yellow Pine. But there it stood, a lone survivor of the primeval forest that once covered all of central Pennsylvania. It was easily the tallest tree in our part of the valley. The base of the trunk was so massive that it took 4 of us kids holding hands to encircle it. The bark was smooth and flaky, the texture of crusty bread and the color of melted butter. Sometimes in the evenings, when the sun was dipping down, the entire trunk would sometimes glow like a giant column of gold. Although no one ever dared to climb the tree to get an exact measurement, Grandpa's best estimate that it was at the topmost branches were 150 feet off the ground. The trunk rose straight as a courthouse column for 60 feet, before it sent out an umbrella of graceful upturned boughs, hung with bristling pine cones, and tipped with long, fragrant needles, color of dark green ink. The pungent scent of those needles lifted on the breeze and could be inhaled from a great distance. Sometimes on crisp, snow-covered days in the winter, or after a hard rain on a summer's night, the sharp, nostril-tickling perfume of that tree would float out across the meadow and down the valley, hugging the twists and turns of the stream, like a giggling young girl pursuing her lover. Yeah? Weird analogy, but alright. Even on the calmest days, that wind played in the tree. The wind played in that tree. The highest branches were always moving, always swaying in the breeze, making a sad and sweet music which accompanied me all my childhood days. Sometimes during winter storms, the wind would howl through the branches, wailing like a woman grieving for a lost child. And sometimes on soft summer nights when the heat of the day still rose steaming from the forest and fields, the wind would murmur through the rifting branches like a mother singing a lullaby to a newborn babe. For us, the Song of the Yellow Pine became so constant and comforting that it was easy to forget about it entirely, taking for granted that it would always be like the rising of the April sun or the setting of the August moon. No one knew for sure how old the tree was until one day late in the summer, when a representative from the district forest office came to talk to my grandfather about the tree. "I've driven by here many a time," the forester said, "and I've always admired your tree. The forestry department tries to keep watch over any old trees in the area, and I think we should put this one on our books. Mind if I take a core sample to determine the exact age of the tree?" "Will it hurt her?" Grandpa asked. "Who? The tree?" No, of course not. I'll just take this metal drill and bore a hole into the side of the trunk and extract a sample. That way we can count the growth rings and determine the age of the tree." Grandpa and I looked at each other. The idea was not too appealing. Of course, we would never think of drilling into the side of the tree. Grandpa had always forbidden us kids to mark or cut the tree in any way. Once, in a misguided show of affection for the pine, I had used my pocket knife to carve my name into the yellow bark. When Grandpa found out, his face turned an angry red. He took away my knife for a month, and he told me to keep clear of the 3 for 30 days. That was the hard part. But when he saw I was genuinely sorry for what I'd done, he forgave me. And I guess the tree did too. After a few weeks, the chip of bark I defaced flaked off, and was carried away by the wind. Yeah, Mysidia is fine. You can leave Mysidia. Knowing all this, I doubted my grandfather would let a forester touch the tree, and I was right. No, Grandpa said. Thanks for your offer, but I think we'll pass. The forester frowned. Mr. Moore, you don't seem to understand. The government requires an up-to-date accounting of many ancient trees in the area. Part of that accounting is an accurate assessment of the tree's age. The only reliable way we have of doing that is through taking a core sample. I assure you that it will not permanently damage the tree in any way. Grandpa rubbed his chin for a moment. All right, he said at last. I guess it can't do any harm. Besides, I've always wondered how long the old girl's been standing there. I was a little squeamish about watching, but I made myself walk over to the tree and stand there while the forester drilled into her side. The core sample came out white and moist and smelling of sap. I waited anxiously as the forester made his count. I think we can pretty well pinpoint the age, the man said at last. As close as I could figure. This tree rose from the ground as a seedling on a warm day in June 1650. I did some quick arithmetic. That makes her over 300 years old, I said. Grandpa beamed. And that's not all, the forester said. This is no ordinary yellow pine. This is what the old-timers call an old-fashioned yellow pine. It's a larger, grander tree than the yellow pine that grows around her today. Some people think the old-fashioned is related to the southern longleaf pine, which only grows in the deep south. We used to have big stands of these trees all over part of Pennsylvania. What happened to them? I asked. Oh, the forester said. They were wiped out by forest fires and beetle infestations, and of course, some of them were harvested for shipmasts or cut up for building timbers. Except for a few specimens still growing up in the northwestern corner of the county, I'd say this is one of the last surviving examples of an old-fashioned pine. Anyway you look at it, Mr. Moore, you've got yourself a valuable tree here. Well, thank you, Grandpa said. Yeah, she's a real beauty, all right. The forester nodded. I'd say you got at least 7,000 board feet here. That's prime lumber. Free of knots and branches. Why, nowadays we're lucky to get 7,000 board feet off a whole acre of clear cutting. And here you have it all in one tree. By the way, the man said, dropping his voice down to almost whisper, when you get ready to have this taken down, you give me a call. I'll see that you get top dollar. The color drained from my grandfather's face. What are you talking about? He asked. We're talking about the value of this tree. My advice would be to harvest it within the next year before lumber prices go down. Why, just this season. Now hold on here, Grandpa said. I don't have any intention of taking this tree down. The forester blinked. What'd you say? I said I don't plan to cut this tree down in any way, shape, or form. The forester laughed. Mr. Moore, do you have any idea of the dollar value of a tree like this? I hesitate to quote a figure right off the top of my head, but I can tell you this. With profits from the sale, you could retire and send this young boy to college. Grandpa gave the forester a cold stare. I am retired, thank you, and if any of my grandkids want to go to college, they can work their way through just like their dad did. Now I'll thank you to take your drill and get off my property. We don't need any blood money from this tree, any old goddamn sap money, I mean. Sorry, any gall-darned sap money, I mean. The forester looked genuinely confused. Well, all right, Mr. Moore, he said slowly. if that's how you feel. But if you change your mind, will you give me a call? I won't change my mind. All right then, good day to you. Then he turned and, shaking his head, he went into the car and drove off. Grandpa heaved a deep sigh. Well, Robin, he said, just goes to show. Some people don't understand anything. He walked up to the tree and placed his hand on the bark. I did too. We'd done this many times as a way of somehow understanding what was going on inside the great tree. Through the skin of my palm, I had often imagined that I felt the flow of sap through the trunk and the surging of life beneath the bark. But now I felt something different. I felt tremors traveling up and down the trunk. Feels like she's shivering, I said. Grandpa nodded. Then he tilted back his head and looked at the branches so far overhead, shuddering in the wind. Don't worry, old girl, I heard him whisper. As long as I'm still here, you will be too. It didn't take long for people in our part of the valley to hear about the forester's offer. Just about everyone in our town thought my grandfather was crazy for preserving that tree, now that its dollar value could be counted and calculated. But Grandpa never gave them the satisfaction of arguing about it. He didn't have to. He knew he was right, and so did we. Grandma and my mother and my father and all us kids knew what the yellow pine was worth. We knew that there was no amount of money that could replace the treasure of living near that great tree, inhaling its perfume every day, listening to its music as we fell into sleep every night. But no matter how much we loved that tree, there was a man who hated it just as much. His name was Horace Hinckley. He was Grandpa's neighbor. Mr. Hinckley and his wife had moved into our area just a few years before, buying a 1-acre lot which sat right along the road, adjoining my grandparents' property. They'd built a small frame house set back from the road, in the shade of the magnificent yellow pine. It wasn't a good place to build a house. The constant shade and moisture from the tree made the inside of the house dark and moldy. The pine sap splattered down on the roof, gumming up the shingles, and the pine needles fell and stuck to the sap, rotting the roof and clogging up the rain gutters and downspouts. To make matters worse, the paint on the outside of the house would crack and peel, falling off in large flakes. This was especially embarrassing because Mr. Hinckley made his living as a house painter. Everyone thought it was a big joke that Mr. Hinckley's house would never hold any paint, no matter how much he scraped and burned and sanded, no matter how many coats of sealer or primer he applied. Mr. Hinckley never could get a paint job to last longer than 6 months. Many times he tried to get Grandpa to have the tree cut down, but my grandfather would just laugh and shake his head. Hinckley, he would say, you've got everything backward. This tree was here for hundreds of years before you came along. You were fool enough to put your house in the wrong place. That's not the tree's fault. Now, if you're really aggravated by this whole thing, why don't you get a construction crew and have them jack your house off the foundation and move it there close to the road, where you can get some sunshine on those boards? But Hinckley wouldn't hear of it. He said he wouldn't move his house for any tree. He said it was a matter of pride. So that's where the matter sat, until Hinckley heard about the forester's offer. The wheels began to spin in his tree-hating brain, and in a few weeks he came up with a plan. My grandfather and I never took Mr. Hinckley's threats against the tree very seriously, until a Wednesday morning in August, when we were sitting down to some hot cakes and bacon in my grandmother's kitchen. It was early morning, earlier than most people like to get up. We planned to go fishing that day, and we were anxious to get on our way. I barely dug into my pancakes when my grandmother noticed something strange going on in our back window. What are those men doing in our yard? She said. Grandpa and I looked at each other. A moment later, we were on the back door and out on the porch. There, moving around in the early light, were 3 men. They set up a surveyor's transom on a tripod. One fellow was sighting through it while the other 2 moved around the yard, pushing metal pins into the ground. I followed my grandfather across the dewy grass. "What are you boys doing on my land?" Grandpa asked. The man behind the transom looked up and was just about to answer when we heard a voice behind us say, "What do you mean, your land?" We spun around, and there, standing in his bathrobe and slippers, with a steaming cup of coffee in his hand, was Horace Hinckley. Mr. Hinckley smiled and took a sip of his coffee. "I always suspected there was something off about that property line," he said. Grandpa fixed him with a hard stare. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. "You know as well as I do that the line between our properties is marked by that stone fence over there. Always has, always will be." Hinckley smiled. He reached into the pocket of his bathrobe and drew something in a legal-sized envelope. "I guess you never looked very carefully at the deed. According to the surveyor's findings, you don't have quite as much land as you thought. It appears that your stone fence is about 20 feet over on my side. The real line is right along here, where they're placing those pins." I ran my eye up the row of markers. Then I saw something that made me catch my breath. The trunk of the yellow pine was a good 4 feet on Hinckley's side of the line. Grandpa's face drew red. You could see his jaw muscles working. "Hinckley," he growled, "you're not getting that tree." Hinckley just smiled and took another sip of coffee. "Listen, don't take my own word for it. Go and hire your own surveyor. Check the line, I'll wait." Grandpa did do that. He hired a surveying company from the northern end of the county to come down and check the figures. But they discovered exactly what we feared. Hinckley's men were right. Yellow Pine was, beyond any shadow of a doubt, located on the house painter's property. "Look," Mr. Hinckley said when he found out. "Because I'm a decent sort, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'll split the money with you 50-50. I don't know what could be fairer than that." My grandfather thought for a moment, and then he sighed and said, "All right, Hinckley. Well, in your mood for making deals, I got a deal for you. You sell me that 20-foot strip of land up to the stone fence, and I'll pay you whatever you would have gotten from your share of the sale of the tree." Mr. Hinckley laughed and waved my grandfather's offer away, as if he was chasing away an annoying fly. "Old man," he said, "you're just blowing smoke. You haven't got that kind of money and you know it. Besides, it's not just money that matters. It's the principle of the thing. What's more, I have my family's safety to consider." "What are you talking about?" Hinckley pointed at the tree. "See how that thing is leaning over my house?" Grandpa squinted at the tree. "What are you talking about? That tree's probably been leaning that way for the last 100 years and will probably be that way for another 100. "Maybe so. With all the severe winter storms we've been having, that tree poses a danger to my house. I checked with the insurance company. They agree. Why, last winter a big branch came down and ruined our chimney." It was true. Last winter a big limb had come down, narrowly missing the house, and sheared off a layer of bricks from the top of the chimney, making the fireplace unusable. "That tree's not going to fall on you or anything else for a couple 100 years," Grandpa said. "That's easy for you to say. You don't have that thing hanging over your head day and night. No, there's no doubt about it. That tree has got to come down. Or my dead body." "Don't be so dramatic. I've already spoken to the lumber company. They're ready to move ahead whenever I say the word. I was thinking tomorrow morning would be a good time for tree felling, eh?" Hinckley turned and started to walk behind the house. Walk back to his house. Then he stopped and turned toward us. "By the way," he said, "I also took the liberty of asking the constable to stop by, just to make sure no one tries to interfere with the tree removal. So don't get any heroic ideas." Then he was gone. "Grandpa," I said, "what can we do? Can we go against the law?" My grandfather placed a hand on my shoulder. "I don't know, Robin, but I can tell you this. We're not going to sit back and watch this happen. We're going to do something to save that tree. I don't know what, but we got to do something." The word spread through our town like wildfire. Everyone canceled their plans for the next morning so they could be there to see that big tree fall. The phone lines buzzed all afternoon, and into the evenings people made excited plans to meet for the tree-felling event. As far as I know, there wasn't a single person in our part of the valley who raised a voice in defense of that tree. It seemed like our family were the only ones who really knew what that tree was worth. To everyone else, it was just an oddity. Nothing more than a morning's entertainment. But to us, cutting the tree was the same as cutting ourselves. Cutting us off from the nutrients and our roots in the soil. That night, neither Grandpa or I could sleep. We sat up almost until midnight, sitting in the soft needles with our backs to the trunk of the great tree. It seemed to me I could feel the life throbbing in her, through the cloth of my shirt, and through the thin layer of skin that covered my flesh and bones. I thought about how painful it had been to watch the forester drill into the trunk of the tree, and I knew that seeing her saw down would be worse. Much worse. The thought was too painful to bear. I shoved it out of my mind. Then I heard the wind rift through the branches far overhead. A cascade of dried needles rained down, and covered us like a delicate blanket. It was then that I heard the song of the wind in the treetops. Heard it more clearly than I ever had before. It sounded sad and shivery. Even though the night was warm, I felt a chill ripple at my back, raise the hairs on my neck. It seemed to be speaking not in words, but in some ancient unspoken tongue, a language that birds and squirrels, and maybe even some very, very old humans could understand. It seemed to be saying that everything would be all right. At least that was the feeling I had at the moment. I know my grandfather heard it too. We listened quietly for a while, and then he reached over and laid a hand on my shoulder. "I've got an idea," he said quietly, "but it's something I'm going to have to do alone. When the lumber trucks come tomorrow, I want you to stay over at your folks' place, out of the way. I don't want anyone to get hurt." That was all he would say about it. Knowing my grandfather, I decided not to press him. Then, for perhaps the last time, I stood and placed both hands on the tree's buttery-colored bark, feeling the pulse of life within her, surging away in the ancient passages of her heart, her dark heartwood. That night I fell into a fitful sleep with my window open, wondering what it would be like to close my eyes without hearing the soft song of the pine. The logging trucks arrived early in the morning, tearing up the ground and spewing black diesel exhaust into the air, the clear pine-scented air. 20 men in hard hats and hobnailed boots roped off all of Hinckley's property and ours, setting up a safety area where no one was allowed to enter. While the men fueled up their saws and sharpened their chains, people began arriving, onlookers and gawkers, families with lawn chairs and strollers and picnic lunches. They spread their blankets and beach towels out on the grass in the cow pasture across the road from Hinckley's place. From there, they would have a great view of the tree and could get good shots with their cameras. Shortly after the crowd began to form, the Rupesburg Volunteer Fire Company showed up. 12 men in big hats and rubber boots and a big yellow raincoats who parked their sleek new truck on the side of the road. The constable pulled up in his car and stood off by himself, smoking a cigarette and watching everything through dark glasses. A reporter from the local paper, the Daily Thunderstorm, showed up with a photographer in tow. If nothing else, I guess they figured it would be a great photo opportunity. Everyone in our family was clustered on our front porch. Grandma was trying to calm everyone down, but it did no good. We were all as nervous as a bunch of long-tailed cats in a room full of rocking chairs. Somehow, in all the noise and confusion, I lost track of Grandpa. Then I saw him. There he was, walking out of the back of the house, carrying a steaming cup of coffee. The vapor that trailed back from the cup made him look like a steam engine as he walked briskly across the yard and sat down in a wooden lawn chair a few feet from the base of the tree. As soon as he sat down, I saw the lumberman speak to him and point back to the safety area. But Grandpa just sat there and sipped his coffee. At last, the foreman of the lumber crew hollered to Hinckley, and we all watched as Hinckley stood there over my grandfather, shouting something we couldn't hear. Grandpa didn't seem to be listening. He just sat there, blowing on his coffee and smiling. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see the constable had snuffed out his cigarette and stepped over the rope that marked the safety area. He was walking across the field now, his revolver jutting out at a dangerous angle on his right hip. The cluster of men stood there for a long time, gesturing and talking, but still Grandpa didn't move. I realized that he was determined to sit there as long as he had to keep that tree from being cut. At last, the constable motioned to the volunteers, and a moment later, the men in yellow were stepping through the rope and joining the others at the base of the tree. What happened next was not pretty. The photographer got a good shot of the scuffle, and they ran the photo front page next day under the headline, "Local Protest Mars Tree Felling Ceremony." It took 6 firemen to carry grandfather off the field and up to our front porch, when they dumped him unceremoniously at our front steps. He was breathing hard and his face was streaked with anger. But I could see he wasn't hurt. The constable looked at him through his dark glasses and said, "You set a foot off this porch, Mr. Moore, and I swear to God I'm taking you straight to the county jail." And he meant it. Grandma drew my grandfather aside and set him down on the porch swing. She put her arms around him and held him tight, the tears starting up in her eyes. "You did all that you could, honey," she said quietly. "I know that," was all Grandpa said. Then he got real quiet. I could hardly watch what happened next. Mr. Hinckley went to his truck and took out a brand new long-handled axe he had bought especially for the occasion. He held the axe over his head and waved it in the air. The crowd, maybe 200 of our friends and neighbors, jumped to their feet and cheered. People sure are strange. Mr. Hinckley took off his sweatshirt. He was wearing a sleeveless t-shirt which showed his pudgy, sunburnt arms. He walked over to the base of the tree and watched as the foreman of the crew spray-painted the red X on the bark of the yellow pine. Before I could recover from the indignity of the act, Hinckley raised the axe and swung it hard. The steel blade bit into the trunk. A piece of bark about the size of my hand flew off, exposing the white meat of the wood. Hinckley chopped away at that scar, making a dozen sloppy chops into the side of the tree. At last, a large wedge fell onto the ground. Hinckley kicked it out of the way with his foot. While this was happening, I felt as if someone had cut into my side. All of us kids started crying. Some people we knew in the crowds, looked over at us like we were crazy. The wind tossed through the top of the tree, and I heard for the last time the song of the pine. A high, plaintive wail that sent shivers through me. I couldn't believe that the men who had come to cut the tree down couldn't hear it too. But a moment later, the sound of the wind was drowned out by the growling of chains. The growling of chainsaws. Now that Hinckley had the satisfaction of striking the first blow, he moved back out of the field and watched the professionals take over. I found out later that the initial plan had been to send a climber up to the topmost branches to cut the top of the tree off. But none of them had ever worked on this big of a tree, and there was no one brave enough to attempt it. So they decided to take the whole thing down in one piece. Oh, there was one problem. Since the tree was leaning slightly in the direction of Hinckley's house, they were going to have to notch it very carefully so that when the giant fell, she would miss the house that Hinckley wanted so badly to preserve. There was a lot of conferencing around the tree trunk about this, but at last, the foreman took a spray can and marked the cuts on the trunk. A big-shouldered man with long-bladed chainsaws stepped forward. He pull-started the saw, and the angry howl of the machine filled the clearing. We all watched with strange satisfaction as the logger stood there under the leaning tree, angling his whirling saw blade into the pungent wood. Sawdust piled up on his pants and gloves and arms, but still the man worked, sweating in the morning sun. It took a good hour to get the notch cut just right at last, when the man stepped back and the foreman swept away the sawdust with a gloved hand. We could see that a deep notch had been cut into the tree, a third of the way into the trunk. Now the loggers stepped around to the back of the tree and began to cut a corresponding notch, higher and wider, into the remaining portion of the trunk. For a long time it seemed like nothing was happening. The loggers removed larger and larger chunks of the tree, but she still stood upright, her branches swaying in the breeze. And to everyone's surprise, there was loud cracking as the tree began slowly to lean. The loggers dropped their saws and pulled back at a run away from the falling tree. But the tree did not fall. It just hung there, at a slight angle, supported by an impossibly small section of wood. I could see the lumbermen were worried. They knew that they were dealing with an incredible amount of force, more than any of them had ever faced. They knew that no one had ever taken down a tree this big in Center County in modern times. And they could see that, as big as she was not going to go down easy. They shut down their saws. In the sudden quiet, I could hear the squeaking and creaking of the tree in the wind. The air was charged with danger, like it is just before a big thunderstorm moves in. After a long time of waiting and watching, the lumberman cautiously approached. One brave logger pulled his chainsaw to life. Revving the noisy engine, he stepped up to the base of the immense tree and touched the tip of the whirling blade to a spot where the stout heartwood still held firm, way, way within the depths of the cut. Suddenly there was an enormous crack. The man dropped his saw and ran. It seemed that it took forever for the tree to fall. The great trunk keeled forward, slowly at first, then building speed. The branches made a great whooshing sound as they trapped the air. I watched open-mouthed as the great tree fell forward and struck the ground with a thunderous thud that shattered the glass on our front porch windows and put a crack a foot wide in the center of the blacktop road. A cloud of dust and pine needles and pulverized wood filled the meadow, swirling around in the morning light. When the dust settled, I saw the wounded form of the great tree, lying on her side, her graceful arms crushed beneath her. The crowd cheered then, cheered as if they had just seen a great thing accomplished. The loggers were happy too. They slapped each other on the backs and yelled and hallooed. They missed Mr. Hinckley's house by a good 50 feet. Mr. Hinckley was in among the crowd, shaking hands and pounding people on the back, laughing at that great horse of his, as if he'd just won a great victory over an evil enemy. As far as he was concerned, he had. Being careful to avoid the grass that lay around our feet, we walked inside and spent the rest of the day out back, away from the crowd and the noise of the saws. It took all day for the crew to cut the trunk into 4 30-foot sections. They used the mechanical loader to lift onto the logging trucks. Then the great diesel logging trucks drove away, taking the body of the yellow pine with them, bound for some paper mill or lumber yard. The clean crew stayed on, cutting up the branches with their chainsaws and stacking the logs, cut to fireplace size, in a neat pile along the back of Hinckley's property, just a few feet from the ugly stump of a pine. But even after they left, the aura of what they had done that day lingered on. The air was laden with a thick, smoky stench of the diesels, and our ears still rang with the murderous whirring of the chainsaws. None of us slept well. Later that night, both my grandfather and I found ourselves sitting out by the broken stump, wondering what had happened. We were too broken to talk about it. Somehow the light of the stars, which used to filter down so softly through the pine needles, seemed harsh and unforgiving. There was a great hole in the sky overhead, where the tree once stood. All that filled it now was the gleam of distant stars and millions of miles of cold, arid space. In the next month, the Hinckley place was a whirlwind of activity. With the money from the sale of his tree, he was free to rectify the damage the pine had caused to the house. Mr. Hinckley had a crew of 12 men come out. They stripped off the old sap-riddled roof and put on a new, clean layer of asphalt shingles. They sanded and primed and painted the house a brilliant white with gold trim. Mr. Hinckley even had the brick chimney repaired and sandblasted to make them look fresh and new. In a few weeks, the house had gone through an amazing transformation. Hinckley made a great show of using that chimney, carrying the pine wood and burning it in the fireplace every night. Grandpa noted with some satisfaction that yellow pine is poor wood for fires. "Why is that?" I asked. "It's too full of sap," he said. "It burns smoky and throws sparks. 2 things you don't want for an indoor fire." But Hinckley didn't seem to mind. He took great pleasure in burning the wood from the tree which had once caused him so much trouble. Then one night, well after midnight, we started from our beds by the wail of a local fire truck. Rushing to the window, I was astonished to see flames leaping from the windows and doors of the Hinckley house. We could see that the Hinckley's had gotten out somehow. They stood by the road in their bare feet and pajamas, shocked but safe. But their house was a lost cause. The firefighters directed a half-hearted stream of water onto the blaze, but it didn't dampen the fire at all. Hinckley's house burnt to the ground in less than an hour. The next morning, nothing was left of the freshly painted house but the stone chimney standing amid a pile of smoking rubble. The pictures in the paper showed the flames leaping up through the holes in the roof and consuming the house. Grandpa read the article out loud at the breakfast table. "It says here, Fire Chief Rupert Jones told a Daily Thunderstorm that the cause of the fire was still under investigation, but the blaze was started probably by a spark which flew from the fireplace and ignited the rug on the living room floor." My grandfather and I looked at each other, a secret smile playing at the corners of our lips. That night we stood by the stump of the pine and looked across the ruins of Hinckley's house, still smoldering in the dark. The wind picked up, and for a moment I thought I heard the song of the pine again. Grandpa must have heard it too, 'cause he placed a hand on the bruised stump and whispered, "I know, girl, I know." Hinckley never rebuilt the house. He and his wife moved out of the county, maybe out of the state for all I know, and was never heard of again. He sold off his land to a farmer, and a year later, my grandfather managed to buy the lot dirt cheap. We never did anything with the rubble. We just let it sit in compost as a reminder of the power of nature. Oh, there's one more thing. We discovered later that the heat of the fire opened the pine cones that lay scattered all across the stump. And the wind, the same wind that blew through the branches of the tree, lifted the airborne seeds up and deposited them in the rich rot of rubble. By fall, 4 seedlings of the old-fashioned yellow pine had sprung up from the blackened earth. We put chicken wire cages around them to keep the deer and rabbits away. We watched those seedlings. Soon they were tall as my grandfather. Ha! Jackass, right? Grandpa made me promise that even after he was gone, no matter how hard things got, we would never sell the land where the yellow pines grew. That way, he said, in a few 100 years or so, we'll have our yellow pines back, perfuming the breeze again. Last time I looked, the saplings were doing just fine, growing there in the sunlight, their graceful boughs waving in the wind, learning to sing the song of the yellow pine. My grandfather was right. The pines will return, along with their music. And if we are lucky, we can once again fall into deep and satisfying sleep each night, serenaded by the music the yellow pines composed for us long, long ago. Okay, that wasn't a spooky story, but I really liked it. I got much more into it than I thought I would. There's something about wild places, man. Like, there's something about that stuff. Nature that, I don't know. You gotta respect those old trees. You dug it? Hell yeah. Alright. How long was that story? Oh my god. Oh, not that bad. Alrighty, talk to me. What are you in the mood for? You want more winter stuff? 'Cause I can dig for that. I got all sorts of things here. Finger Lakes. Ye old winter spoopage. I can make that happen, probably. Oh, ye old. Hold on. You have to run to the restroom real quick, though? Not a problem. It'll probably take me as long as it takes me to find it. I gotta look for old. What's likely to be old? Oh, hell yeah. Okay. Jackpot. 1804 is when the author was born. How's that for old? Ghosts and hauntings of the Finger Lakes. There's probably something there too. The Finger Lakes seem hella old. There's a lake monster. No, these are more hauntings. This isn't really quite there. Ah, the Victorian age is also hella old. Let's see. No, nothing in particular. Newfoundland and Labrador seem like a good... Welcome back! Alright, I've got one. I have no idea how long it is. But I will try it. Ghost Stories, Southwestern Connecticut. Well, it's probably gonna be the same deal. It's probably gonna be hauntings, right? Yeah, it's all hauntings. Right, that doesn't help me. Ghost hunting. Oral mysteries. Hauntings and horrors. But it doesn't have fucking... Texas. I don't care about him. Complete short stories collection. Actually, I don't know why I didn't think to look at Russia first. That was a bit of a dumb. Do. Yo, Wolfex. Man, I'm seeing a lot of goats. Snow White is not a thing. There is simply the wolf, but that's not... Yeah, we do. Poor Mysidia got called out by every single mod so far. Vampire. Shamaika the judge. Okay. There is probably winter in here. Winter. Oh my god. Oh. 10, 11, 12. It's pretty evenly dispersed. It's not worth looking into. Fairy tales of the Russians and other Slavs. Oh, you've seen him around. Okay. And then there's Sassy, who just knows. Let's see. Swankies, Cecilia. God of Death, Star of the Forest. Serpent Wife. Firebird. There's nothing explicitly about winter. Oh my god, I found Father Frost, though. Lord knows that should count. Okay. But first, this is The Snow Image, A Childish Miracle, by Nathaniel Hawthorne. I don't think you do. You might want to ban them. Never. So if Nathaniel Hawthorne sounds familiar, or doesn't, this is because they wrote the Scarlet Letter and the House of Seven Gables. Only one of which I read, and neither of which I enjoyed. Born in Salem, I came to know many of the artists, including Edgar Allan Poe. Edgar Allan Poe! I am a fool! I forgot to look at winter for Edgar Allan Poe. Oh, fuck me. He had to have written something about winter. It's in here somewhere. Hold on. Edgar Allan Poe. Winter stories. Come on. 12 beautiful winter poems. I don't give a shit. The Forest of Reverie. Just like snow, mystery, and war. Oh, I'm better off just hitting Control F for winter. I don't know. He was a pretty edgy guy. Are you kidding me? Oh, there we go. Oh, I saw a whole cluster pop up. Do. Nothing explicitly about winter. Alright, we'll circle back to Poe. I might take specific suggestions for Poe, because that's a master's thesis to try to figure out. I have yet to read, to my eternal shame. Y'all are helping me get through my book of Poe. Y'all are helping me get through my book of a lot of things. Alright. Hawthorne's writing is known for its atmosphere's darkness and psychological complexity. Okay. This was published in 1852. Is that old enough for you, Sassy? Alright. I have to read this in my fancy voice because it's old. One afternoon on a cold winter's day, when the sun shone forth with a chilly brightness, after a long storm, two children asked leave of their mother to run out and play in the new fallen snow. The elder child was a little girl, whom, because she was of tender and modest disposition, and was thought to be very beautiful, her parents, and other people who were familiar with her, used to call Violet. But her brother was known by the style and title of Peony, on the account of the ruddiness of his broad and round little phiz, which made everyone think of sunshine and great scarlet flowers. The father of these two children, a certain Mr. Lindsay, it is important to say, was an excellent but exceedingly matter-of-fact sort of man, a dealer in hardware, and was sturdily accustomed to take what is called the common-sense view of all matters that came under consideration. With a heart about as tender as other people's, he had a head as hard and impenetrable, and therefore perhaps as empty as one of the iron pots which it was part of his business to sell. The mother's character, on the other hand, had a strain of poetry in it, a trait of unworldly beauty, a delicate and dewy flower, as it were, that had survived out her imaginative youth, and still kept itself alive amidst the dusty realities of matrimony and motherhood. So Violet and Peony, as I began with saying, besought their mother to let them run out and play in the new snow, for though it had looked so dreary and dismal, drifting drownward out of the grey sky, it had a very cheerful aspect now that the sun was shining down on it. The children dwelt in a city and had no wider play place than a little garden before the house, divided by a white fence from the street, and with a pear tree and 2 or 3 plum trees overshadowing it, and some rose bushes just in the front of the parlor windows. The trees and shrubs, however, were now leafless, and their twigs were enveloped in light snow, which thus makes a kind of wintry foliage, with here and there a pendant icicle for the fruit. "Yes, Violet, yes, my little Peony," said their kind mother. "You may go out and play in the new snow." Accordingly, the good lady bundled up her darlings in woolen jackets and wadded socks, and put comforters round their necks and a pair of striped gaiters on each little pair of legs, and worsted mittens on their hands, and gave them a kiss apiece, by way of spell, to keep away Jack Frost. Forth sallied the 2 children with a hop, skip, and jump that carried them at once into the very heart of the huge snowdrift, whence Violet emerged like a snow bunting, while little Peony floundered out with his round face in full bloom. Then what a merry time had they, to look at them frolicking in the wintry garden. You would have thought that the dark and pitiless storm had been sent for no other purpose than to provide a new plaything for Violet and Peony, and that they themselves had been created, as the snowbirds were, to take delight only in the tempest, and in the white mantle which is spread over the earth. At last, when they had frosted one another all over with handfuls of snow, Violet, after laughing heartily at little Peony's figure, was struck with a new idea. "You look exactly like a snow image, Peony," said she, "if your cheeks were not so red. And that puts me in mind. Let's make an image out of snow, an image of a little girl, and it shall be our sister, and shall run about and play with us all winter long. Won't it be nice?" "Oh, yes," cried Peony, as plainly as he could speak, for he was but a little boy. "That'll be nice, and Mamma shall see it." "Yes," answered Violet. "Mamma shall see the new little girl, but she must not make her come into the warm parlor, for, you know, our little snow sister will not love the warmth." And forthwith the children began this great business of making a snow image that should run about, while their mother, who was sitting in the window and overheard some of their talk, could not help smiling at the gravity with which they set about it. They really seemed to imagine that there would be no difficulty whatsoever in creating a live little girl out of snow. And to say the truth, if miracles are ever to be wrought, it will be by putting our hands to work in precisely such a simple and undoubting frame of mind as that in which Violet and Peony now undertook to perform one, without so much as knowing that it was a miracle. So thought the mother, and thought, likewise, that the new snow, just fallen from heaven, would be excellent material to make new beings of, if it were not so very cold. She gazed at the children a moment longer, delighting to watch their little fingers, the girl tall for her age, graceful and agile, and so delicately colored that she looked like a cheerful thought more than a physical reality, while Peony expanded in breadth rather than height, and rolled along on his short and sturdy legs, as substantial as an elephant, though not quite so big. Then their mother resumed her work. What it was, I forget, but she was either trimming a silken bonnet for Violet, or darning a pair of stockings for little Peony's short legs. Again, however, and again, and yet other agains, she could not help turning her head out the window to see how the children got on with their snow image. Indeed, it was an exceedingly pleasant sight. Those bright little souls had their task. Moreover, it was really wonderful to observe how knowingly and skillfully they managed the matter. Violet assumed chief direction, and told Peony what to do, while, with her own delicate fingers, she shaped out all the nicer parts of the snow figure. It seemed, in fact, not so much to be made by the children as to grow up under their hands, while they were playing and prattling about it. Their mother was quite surprised at this. The longer she looked, the more and more surprised she grew. "What remarkable children mine are," thought she, smiling with a mother's pride, and smiling at herself too for being so proud of them. What other children could have made something so like a little girl's figure out of snow at the first trial? Ah, well, but now I must finish Peony's new frock, for his grandfather is coming tomorrow, and I want the little fellow to look handsome. So she took up the frock, and was soon busily at work again with her needle, as the two children with their snow image. But still as the needle travelled hither and thither through the seams of the dress, the mother made her toil light and happy by listening to the airy voices of Violet and Peony. They kept talking to one another all the time, their tongues being quite as active as their feet and hands. Except at intervals, she could not distinctly hear what was said, but had a merely sweet impression that they were in a most loving mood, and were enjoying themselves highly, and that the business of making snow image went prosperously on. Now and then, however, when Violet and Peony happened to raise their voices, words were as audible as if they had been spoken in the very parlor where the mother sat. Oh, how delightfully those words echoed in her heart, even though they meant nothing so very wise or wonderful after all. But you must know, a mother listens with her heart as much as with her ears, and thus she is often delighted with trills of celestial music, when other people can hear nothing of the kind. "Peony! Peony!" cried Violet to her brother, who had gone to another part of the garden. "Bring me some of that fresh snow, Peony, from the very farthest corner. where we have not been trampling. I want to shape our little snow sister's bosom with it. You know, to that part that must be quite pure, just as it came out of the sky. Have you ever read Snow Angels Are Illegal Where I Live on stream? No, we have not, but can you... I should find that, or you should send it to me. I've never heard of it. Here it is, Violet, answered Peony, in his bluff tone, but a very sweet tone, too, as he came floundering through the half-trodden drifts. Here's the snow for her little bosom. Oh, Violet, how beautiful she begins to look. You like it? Thanks, Sassy. Yes, said Violet, thoughtfully and quietly. Our snow sister does look very lovely. I did not quite know, Peony, that we could make such a sweet girl as this. The mother, as she listened, thought how fit and delightful an incident would be if fairies, still better, angel children, were to come from paradise, and play invisibly with her own darlings, and help them to make their snow image, giving it features of celestial babyhood. Violet and Peony would not be aware of their mortal playmates. Only they would see the image grew beautiful while they worked at it, and would think that they themselves had done it all. My little girl and boy deserve such playmates if any mortal children did, said the mother to herself, and she smiled again at her own motherly pride. God, this woman is so fucking full of herself. Anyway, nevertheless, the idea seized upon her imagination, and ever and anon she took a glimpse out of the window, half dreaming that she might see the golden-haired children in paradise sporting with her own golden-haired Violet and bright-cheeked Peony. Now for a few moments there was a busy and earnest but indistinct hum of two children's voices, as Peony and Violet wrought together with one happy consent. Violet still seemed to be the guiding spirit, while Peony acted rather as a laborer, and brought her the snow from far and near. And yet the little urchin, evidently, had a proper understanding of the matter, too. Peony! Peony! Cried Violet, for her brother was again at the other side of the garden. Bring me those light wreaths of snow that have rested on the lower branches of the pear tree. You can clamber on the snowdrift, Peony, and reach them easily. I must have them to make some of the ringlets for our snow sister's head. Here they are, Violet, answered the little boy. Take care that you don't break them. Well done, how pretty. Does she not look sweetly? Said Violet, with a very satisfied tone. Now we must have some shining bits of ice to make the brightness of her eyes. She's not finished yet, Mamma. She's not finished yet. Mamma will see how very beautiful she is, but Papa will say, Tush, nonsense. Come in out of the cold. Let us call Mamma to look out, said Peony, and then he shouted lustily, Mamma! 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 Look out and see what a nice little girl we're making. The mother put down her work for an instant, and looked out the window, but it so happened that the sun, this was one of the shortest days of the whole year, had sunken so nearly to the edge of the world that a setting shine came obliquely into the lady's eyes. So she was dazzled, you must understand, and could not distinctly observe what was in the garden. Still, however, through all that bright, blinding dazzle of the sun and the new snow, she beheld a small white figure in the garden that seemed to have a wonderful deal of human likeness about it, and she saw Violet and Peony. Indeed, she looked more at them than at the image. She saw two children still at work, Peony bringing fresh snow and Violet applying it to the figure, as scientifically as a sculptor adds to clay to his model. Indistinctly, as she discerned the snow child, the mother thought to herself that never before was there a snow figure so cunningly made, nor ever such a dear little girl and boy to make it. They do everything better than other children, said she, very complacently. No wonder they make better snow angels. Sorry, snow images. God damn it, I'm just reading what I want to read. She sat down again to work, and made as such haste with it as possible, because twilight would soon come, and Peony's frock was not yet finished. And grandfather was expected by railroad pretty early in the morning. Faster and faster, therefore, went her flying fingers. The children, likewise, kept busily at work in the garden, and still the mother listened. Whenever she could catch a word, she was amused to observe how their little imaginations had gotten mixed up with what they were doing, and carried away by it. They seemed positively to think that the snow child would run around and play with them. "What a nice playmate shall be with us, for all winter long," said Violet. "I hope Papa will not be afraid of her giving us a cold. Shan't you love her so dearly, Peony?" "Oh, yes," cried Peony, "and I will hug her, and she shall sit down close to me, and drink some of my warm milk." Oh no, Peony," answered Violet with grave wisdom. "That will not do at all. Warm milk will not be wholesome for our little snow sister. Little snow people like her eat nothing but icicles. No, Peony, we must not give her anything warm to drink." It was a minute or two of silence, for Peony, whose short legs were never weary, had gone on a pilgrimage again to the other side of the garden. All of a sudden, Violet cried out, loudly and joyfully, "Look here, Peony, come quickly! A light has been shining on her cheek, out of that rose-colored cloud, and the color does not go away. Is that not beautiful?" "Yes, it is beautiful," answered Peony, pronouncing the 3 syllables with deliberate accuracy. "Oh, Violet, only look at her hair. It's all like gold." "Oh, certainly," said Violet with a tranquillity, as if it were very much a matter of course. "That color, you know, comes from the golden clouds that we see up there in the sky. She's almost finished now, but her lips must be very red, redder than her cheeks. Perhaps, Peony, it will make them red if we both kiss them." Accordingly, the mother heard 2 smart little smacks, as if both her children were kissing the snow image on its frozen mouth. But this did not seem to make the lips quite red enough. Violet proposed that the snow child should be invited to kiss Peony's scarlet cheek. "Come on, little snow sister, kiss me," cried Peony. You have thunder, kitty. "There, she kissed you," added Violet, "and now her lips are very red. And she blushed a little, too." "Oh, what a cold kiss!" cried Peony. Just then, a breeze of the pure west wind, sweeping through the garden and rattling at the parlor windows. It sounded so wintry cold that the mother was about to tap on the window pane with her thimbled finger to summon the 2 children in, and they both cried out to her with one voice. The tone was not a tone of surprise, though they were evidently a good deal excited. It appeared rather as if they were very much rejoiced at some event that had now happened, but which they had been looking for, and had reckoned upon all along. "Mamma, Mamma! We've finished our little snow sister, and she's running around in the garden with us. What imaginative little beings my children are," thought the mother, putting the last few stitches into Peony's frock. "And it's strange, too, that they make me almost as much a child as they themselves are. I can hardly keep believing now that the snow image has really come to life." "Dear Mamma," cried Violet, "pray look out and see what a sweet playmate we have." The mother, thus entreated, could no longer delay to look forth from the window. The sun had now gone out of the sky, leaving however rich inheritance of his brightness among the purple and golden clouds which make the sunsets of winter so magnificent. Alright, I agree with Hawthorne on that one. But there was not the slightest gleam or dazzle, either on the window or on the snow, so that the good lady could look all over the garden and see everything and everybody in it. And what do you think she saw there? Violet and Peony, of course, her 2 own darling children. Ah, but whom did she see besides? Well, if you'll believe me, it was a small figure of a girl, dressed in all white with rose-tinted cheeks and ringlets of golden hue, playing about the garden with 2 children, Stranger though she was, the child seemed to be on as familiar terms with Violet and Peony as they were with her, as if all three had been playmates during the whole of their little lives. The mother thought to herself that it certainly must be the daughter of one of the neighbors, and that, seeing Violet and Peony in the garden, the child had run across the street to play with them. So this kind lady went to the door, intending to invite the little runaway into her comfortable parlor, for, now that the sunshine was withdrawn, the atmosphere out of doors was already growing very cold. But after opening the house door, she stood an instant on the threshold, hesitating whether she ought to ask the child to come in, or whether she should even speak to her. Indeed, she almost doubted whether it were a real child after all, or only a light wreath of the new-fallen snow, blown hither and thither around the garden by the intensely cold west wind. There was certainly something very singular about the aspect of the little stranger. Among all the children of the neighborhood, the lady could remember no such face, with its pure white and delicate rose color, and the golden ringlets tossing about the forehead and cheeks. As for her dress, which was entirely of white, and fluttering in the breeze, it was such as no reasonable woman would put on a little girl when sending her out to play in the depth of winter. It made this kind and careful mother shiver, only to look at the small feet, with nothing in the world on them, except for a very thin pair of white slippers. Nevertheless, hardly as she was clad, the child seemed to not feel the slightest inconvenience from the cold, but danced so slightly over the snow that the tips of her toes left hardly a print on its surface, while Violet could just barely keep pace with her, and Peony's short legs compelled him to lag behind. Once, in the course of their play, the strange child placed herself between Violet and Peony, and taking the hand of each, skipped merrily forward, and they along with her. Almost immediately, however, Peony pulled away his little fist and began to rub it, as if the fingers were tingling with cold, and Violet also released herself, though with less abruptness, gravely remarking that it was better not to take hold of hands. The white-robed damsel said not a word, but danced about just as merrily as before. If Violet and Peony did not choose to play with her, she could make just as good a playmate of the brisk and cold west wind, which kept blowing her all about the garden, and took such liberties with her that they seemed to have been friends for a long time. All this while the mother stood on the threshold, wondering how a little girl could look so much like a flying snowdrift, or how a snowdrift could look very much like a little girl. She called Violet and whispered to her. "Violet, my darling, what's this child's name?" asked she. "Does she live near us?" "My dearest mamma," answered Violet, laughing to think that her mother didn't comprehend so plain an affair. "This is our little snow sister, whom we've just been making." "Yes, dear mamma," cried Peony, running to his mother and looking up simply into her face. "This is our snow image. Is it not a nice little child?" At this instant a flock of snowbirds came flitting through the air. As was very natural, they avoided Violet and Peony. But, and this looked strange, they flew at once to the white-robed child, fluttered eagerly about her head, lighted on her shoulders, and seemed to claim her as an old acquaintance. She, on her part, was evidently as glad to see these little birds, old Winter's grandchildren, as they were to see her, and welcomed them by holding out both her hands. Hereupon, they each and all tried to alight on her 2 palms, and 10 small fingers and thumbs, crowding one another, with an immense fluttering of their tiny wings. One dear little bird nested tenderly in her bosom. Another put its bill to her lips. They were as joyous all the while, and seemed much in their element, as you may have seen them when sporting with a snowstorm. Violet and Peony stood laughing at this pretty sight. They enjoyed the merry time with their new playmate. They enjoyed the merry time which their new playmate was having with these small-winged visitants. almost as though they themselves took part in it. "Violet," said her mother, greatly perplexed, "tell me the truth without any jest. Who is this little girl?" "My darling mamma," answered Violet, looking seriously into her mother's face and apparently surprised that she should need any further explanation. "I have told you truly who she is. It is our little snow image, which Peony and I have been making. Peony will tell you so as well as I." "Yes, mamma," asseverated Peony, with much gravity in his crimson little phiz. "It's a little snow child. Is she not a nice one? But, mamma, her hand is so very cold." Well, mamma still hesitated what to think and what to do. The street gate was thrown open, and the father of Violet and Peony appeared, wrapped in a pilot cloth sack, with a fur cap drawn down over his ears, and the thickest of gloves on his hands. Mr. Lindsay was a middle-aged man with a weary, yet a happy look on his wind-flushed and frost-pinched face, as if he's been busy all day long, and was glad to get back to his quiet home. His eyes brightened at the sight of his wife and children. Although he could not help uttering a word or two of surprise at finding the whole family in open air, on so bleak a day, and after sunset too. He perceived the little white stranger sporting to and fro in the garden, like a dancing snow wreath, and the flock of birds fluttering around her head. "Pray, what little girl might that be?" inquired the very sensible man. "Surely her mother must be crazy to let her go out in such bitter weather, as it has been today, with only that flimsy white gown and those thin slippers." "My dear husband," said his wife, "I know no more about this little thing than you do. Some neighbor's child, I suppose, or Violet and Peony," she added, laughing at herself for repeating such an absurd story, "insists that she's nothing more than a snow image, which they have been busy about the garden almost all afternoon." As she said this, the mother glanced her eyes toward the spot where the children's snow image had been made. It was her surprise on perceiving that there was not the slightest trace of so much labor. No image at all. No piled up heap of snow. Nothing whatever, save the prints of the little footsteps around a vacant space. "This is very strange," said she. "What is strange, my dear mother?" asked Violet. "Dear father, do you not see how it is? This is our snow image, which P and I have made, because we wanted another playmate. Did not we, Peony?" "Yes, papa," said the crimson Peony. "It is our little snow sister. Is she not beautiful? But she gave me such a cold kiss." "Nonsense, children," cried their good, honest father, who, as we have already intimated, had an exceedingly common-sensible way of looking at matters. "Do not tell me of making live figures out of snow. Come, wife, this little stranger must not stay out in the bleak air for a moment longer. We'll bring her into the parlor. You shall give her supper of warm bread and milk, and make her as comfortable as you can. Meanwhile, I will inquire among the neighbors, or, if necessary, send the city crier around the streets to give notice of a lost child." So saying, this honest and very kind-hearted man was going toward the little white damsel, with the best intentions in the world. But Violet and Peony, each seizing their father by the hand, earnestly besought him not to make her come in. "Dear father," cried Violet, putting herself before him, "it is true what I have been telling you. This is our little snow girl, and she cannot live any longer than while she breathes the cold west wind. Do not make her come into the hot room." "Yes, father," shouted Peony, stamping his little foot, so mightily was he in earnest. "This be nothing but our little snow child. She will not love the hot fire." "Nonsense, children, nonsense, nonsense," cried the father, half vexed, half laughing at what he considered to be their foolish obstinacy. "Run into the house this moment. It's too late to play any longer now. I must take care of this little girl immediately, or she'll catch a death of cold." "Husband, dear husband," said his wife in a low voice, for she had been looking narrowly at the snow child, and was more perplexed than ever. "There's something very singular in all this. You'll think me foolish, but may it not be that some invisible angel has been attracted by the simplicity and good faith with which our children has set about their undertaking? May he not have spent an hour of his immortality in playing with those dear little souls? And so the result is what we call a miracle. No, no, do not laugh at me. I see what a foolish thought it is. My dear wife, replied the husband, laughing heartily, you are as much a child as Violet and Peony. And in one sense so she was, for through all her life she'd kept her heart full of childlike simplicity and faith, which was as pure and clear as a crystal, and looking at all matters through the transparent medium, she sometimes saw truths so profound that other people laughed at them as nonsense and absurdity. But now kind Mr. Lindsay had entered the garden, breaking away from his 2 children, who still sent their shrill voices after him, beseeching him to let the snow-child stay and enjoy herself in the cold west wind. As he approached, the snowbirds took to flight. The little white damsel also fled backward, shaking her head, as if to say, "Pray do not touch me," and roguishly, as it appeared, leading him through the deepest of the snow. Once the good man stumbled and floundered upon his face, so that, gathering himself up again with the snow sticking from his rough pilot cloth sack, he looked as white and wintry a snow image of the largest size. Some of the neighbors, meanwhile, seeing him from their windows, wondered what could possess poor Mr. Lindsay to be running around his garden in pursuit of a snowdrift, which the west wind was driving hither and thither. At length, after a vast deal of trouble, he chased the little stranger into a corner, where she could not possibly escape him. His wife had been looking on, and, it being nearly twilight, was wonderstruck to see how the snow girl gleamed and sparkled, and how she seemed to shed a glow all around her. When driven into a corner, she positively glistened like a star. 'Twas the frosty kind of brightness, too, like that of an icicle in the moonlight. The wife thought it strange that good Mr. Lindsay should see nothing remarkable in the snow-child's appearance. "Come, you little odd thing," cried the honest man, seizing her by the hand. "I've caught you at last, and I'll make you comfortable in spite of yourself. We'll put on a nice, warm pair of work-side stockings on your frozen little feet. You shall have a good, thick shawl to wrap around yourself in. Your poor white nose, I'm afraid, is actually frostbitten, but we'll make it all right. Come along in." And so, with the most benevolent smile on his sagacious face, all purple as it was with the cold, this very well-meaning gentleman took the snow-child by the hand and led her to the house. She followed him, droopingly and reluctant, for all the glow and sparkle was gone out of her figure. And whereas just before she had resembled a bright, frosty, star-gemmed evening, with a crimson gleam on the gold horizon, she now looked as dull and languid as a thaw, as kind Mr. Lindsay led her up the stairs of the door. Violet and Peony looked into his face, their eyes full of tears, which froze before they could run down their cheeks, and again entreated him not to bring their snow image into the house. "Not bring her in!" exclaimed the kind-hearted man. "Why, you are crazy, my little Violet, quite crazy, my small Peony. She is so cold already that her hand is almost frozen in mine, in spite of my thick gloves. Why would you have her freeze to death?" His wife, as he came up the stairs, had been taking another long, earnest, almost awe-stricken gaze at the little white stranger. She hardly knew whether or not it was a dream, but she could not help fancying that she saw the delicate print of Violet's fingers on the child's neck. It looked as if, while Violet was shaping out the image, she had given it a little pat with her hand, and neglected to smooth the impression quite away. "After all, husband," said the mother, recurring to her ideas that the angels would be as much delighted to play with Violet and Peony as she herself was, "after all, she does look strangely like a snow image. I do believe she's made of snow." A puff of west wind blew against the snow-child, and again she sparkled like a star. "Snow!" repeated good Lindsay, drawing the reluctant guest over his hospitable threshold. No wonder she looks like snow. She's half frozen, poor thing. But a good fire will put everything to right. Without further talk, and always with the same best intentions, this highly benevolent and common-sensible individual led the little white damsel, drooping, more and more, out of the frosty air, and into his comfortable parlour. A Heidenberg stove, filled to the brim with intensely burning anthracite, was sending a bright gleam through the isinglass of the iron door, causing the vase of water on the top to fume and bubble with excitement. A warm, sultry smell was diffused throughout the room. The thermometer on the wall, furthest from the stove, stood at 80 degrees. The parlour was hung with red curtains covered with a red carpet, and looked just as warm as it felt. The difference betwixt the atmosphere here and the cold, wintry twilight out of doors was like stepping at once from Nova Zembla to the hottest part of India, or from the North Pole into an oven. Oh, this was the fine place for a white little stranger. The common, sensible man placed the snow child on the hearthrug, right in front of the hissing and fuming stove. "Now she'll be comfortable," cried Mr. Lindsay, rubbing his hands and looking about him with the pleasantest smile you ever saw. "Make yourself at home, my child." Sad and drooping, looked the little white maiden, and stood on the hearthrug with the hot blast of the stove striking her like a pestilence. Once she threw a glance wistfully toward the windows, and caught a glimpse through its red curtains of the snow-covered roofs, and stars glimmering frostily, and all the delicious intensity of the cold night. The bleak wind rattled on the window panes, as if it were summoning her to come forth. But there stood the snow child, drooping before the hot stove. But the common sensible man saw nothing amiss. "Come, wife," said he, "let her have a pair of thick stockings and woolen shawl or blanket directly, and tell Dora to give her some warm supper as soon as the milk boils. You, Violet and Peony, amuse your little friend. She's out of spirits, you see, at finding herself in a strange place. For my part, I will go among the neighbours and find out where she belongs." The mother, meanwhile, had gone in search of the shawl and stockings, for her own view of the matter, however subtle and delicate, had given way, as it always did, to the stubborn materialism of her husband. Without heeding the remonstrances of his two children, who still kept murmuring that their little snow sister did not love the warmth, good Mr. Lindsay took his departure, shutting the parlour door carefully behind him. Turning up the collar of his sack over his ears, he emerged from the house, had barely reached the street gate, when he was recalled by the screams of Violet and Peony, and the rapping of a thimbled finger against the parlour window. "Husband, husband!" cried his wife, showing her horror-stricken face through the window panes. "There's no need for going to the child's parents." "We told you so, father," screamed Violet and Peony, as he re-entered the parlour. "You'd bring her in. And now our poor dear little beautiful snow sister is thawed." And their sweet little faces were already dissolved in tears, so that their father, seeing what strange things occasionally happen in this everyday world, felt not a little anxious lest his children might be going to thaw too. In utmost perplexity he demanded an explanation of his wife. She could only reply that being summoned to the parlour by the cries of Violet and Peony, she found no trace of the little white maiden, unless it was the remains of a heap of snow, which, while she was gazing at it, melted quite away upon the hearthrug. "And there you see is all that's left of it," added she, pointing to the water in front of the stove. "Yes, father," said Violet, looking reproachfully at him through her tears. "That is all that's left of our dear little snow sister." "Naughty father!" cried Peony, stamping his foot, and I shudder to say, shaking his little fist at the common sensible man. "We told you how it would be. What for did you bring her in?" And the Heidenberg stove, through the isinglass of its door, seemed to glare at good Mr. Lindsay like a red-eyed demon, triumphing in the mischief which it had done. This, you'll observe, is one of those rare cases, which yet will occasionally happen, where common sense finds itself at fault. The remarkable story of the snow image led to that sagacious class of people to whom Mr. Good Lindsay belongs. It might seem a bit childish of Harris, is nevertheless capable of being moralized in various methods, greatly for their edification. One of its lessons, for instance, might be that it behooves men, especially men of benevolence, to consider well what they are about, and, before acting on their philanthropic purposes, to be quite sure that they comprehend the nature and all the relations of the business in hand. What has been established as an element of good may prove absolute mischief to another, even as the warmth of a parlour was proper enough for children of flesh and blood like Violet and Peony, though by no means very wholesome even for them, but involved nothing short of annihilation to the unfortunate snow image. Damn, that one was long. I've got one more left in me, and Sassy just sent me something. Sassy, do you still have ears? Or have you been taken by the sleep demons? I think Sassy's been taken. Not seeing Sassy on the viewer list. I think Sassy has finally given in to the tired. That being said, the viewer list has been wrong before. Still says the 4 viewers. Suddenly back? Yeah, she's back? Question mark? Like, I don't know how this works, dog. Twitch is derpy. Is Sassy here or not? It's Schrodinger's Sassy. I don't want to read it if she's not here. Then she can't enjoy it as much. This is the true mystery. Getting an inconclusive answer. Schrodinger says. Yeah, alright. Schrodinger's. Ah, fuck it. I can't spell it anyway. I have a little song. Just looking up the lyrics to it. Actually, hold on. I could do this better. There we go. What's I do? Oh, Sassy is alive. Hey! Oh, you wanted to make sure you weren't gonna miss your story. Alright. Song later, story now. So, this is called Snow Angels Are Illegal Where I Live. Written by Themyscira, as posted on the Creepypasta Stories site, which my browser vehemently told me was not a good website, but I clicked on it anyway because Sassy sent it to me, and Sassy would never steer me wrong. My town is in one of those northwestern states, which, if you know anything about the Northeast, means snow like 6 months out of the year. Wait. Hold on. My town is in one of the northwestern states, which, if you know anything about the Northeast... Anyway, to make things worse, my town's approximately in the middle of bumfuck nowhere. We deal with it as well as any other tiny northwestern town, which... Well, that's all you need to know. There's a town up here that's literally based around a prison. That's it. That's the whole point of the town. Pretty much to house the people who work there. Danger site. It's pretty dismal sometimes. So you'd think, given the lack of other things to do, they'd embrace all types of winter entertainment. And you wouldn't be wrong. Snowmen are an art form in my town. Ice sculptures get pretty competitive. Tobogganing and sledding are big deals. But snow angels are illegal. In fact, I didn't even know they were a thing until I saw someone doing it in a film once. I was over at a friend's house, and they had an older cousin visiting from out of town. She brought the tape with her, and it was one of her favorites. She said she thought we'd love it. She saw Harry and I staring at the TV in confusion and laughed at us. Never noticed that. Leave it to Wolfie to double check whether or not I misspeak or if it's actually a typo. What? You've never seen a snow angel? She asked us mockingly. I don't think it was malicious. I think she was just teasing the way some people do. You know the whole kids these days trope that every generation thinks they invented. We shook our heads, and she climbed to her feet, gesturing for us to follow her while she suited up to go outside. She got as far as falling onto her back in the yard, us following like ducklings, before my friend's dad came running out of the garage, yelling at us at the top of his lungs. I'd never heard Harry's dad yell like that before. Ever. And I've never heard him raise his voice since. Detective Wolfie. Scared the bejesus out of all of us, including Harry's cousin. He'd sent Harry and I inside, and I didn't hear what he said to her, but she was as white as a sheet by the time he was done. They came back in afterwards, and Harry's dad called mine to come pick me up. Harry's cousin never came to visit again, but I never forgot. I knew there was something wrong with making a snow angel, I just never knew what. Harry and I never discussed it. We went back to sledding and snow forts and never said a word. We both knew that something big had just happened, but neither of us was old enough or mature enough to really take any meaning from it. Nearly a decade passed before we thought of it again. Harry and I were both pretty average-looking kids. Neither of us had a whole lot going on to give us any social edge. So dating in our very small high school, where the boys outnumber the girls by something like 75%, was pretty much a crap shot. And neither of us were interested in the male half of the population. So when Harry formed a crush on Melissa, we both kind of knew it was doomed. I was his best friend, though. It was my job to be supportive. So I didn't say anything. Like, at all. I didn't know the first thing about being a wingman, but I did hesitantly suggest that Harry might get Melissa's attention by doing something cool, which in teenage boy translates to stupid and or dangerous. Unfortunately, Harry took that advice to heart. God, I wish I could take those words back now. It was late October and it was already snowing pretty regularly. Nothing bad yet, just more than a light dusting. Halloween fell on a Wednesday that year. It's the weekend before a few of us got together for a kind of preemptive party. We basically turned it into an excuse to party the whole week. We're out at Harry's new house. His dad had recently built a really nice new place outside of town. He was kind of isolated, but also had a hot tub, so... Anyway, isolation worked in our favor. No one was liable to file a noise complaint or curfew violation on the way out here. The irony is Harry's dad actually had given us permission to have a little get-together as long as we promised to be responsible. I guess it was because Harry was kind of going through a hard time with his mom having left and all. It was a full moon that night. It wasn't snowing, but it had that morning. There was still a pretty thick carpet of it all across the lawn. There was 8 of us, 4 boys, 4 girls, Harry and myself, Melissa, her best friend Joanne, her little sister Nicole, and their boyfriends Travis, Hunter, and Chad. Melissa and Nicole were in the hot tub with Chad and Travis, while Joanne and Hunter and Harry and I were playing pong on the deck. Harry and I were losing. Pretty badly, actually. Travis was mocking us from the hot tub, his arm around Melissa. "Nice shot, asshole," he commented after one of Harry's swings had gone wide. The ball tapped impatiently across the deck, careening off the... The ball tapped impatiently across the deck, careening off into the snow beyond. Harry made an impatient sound. I could tell Travis's comments were starting to get under his skin. His jaw was clenched, and I could visibly see him holding back his temper as he marched down the steps to collect the ball. "Come on," I hissed at Travis under my breath. "Quit being a douche." Travis opened his mouth, most likely to say something nasty, but before he could get the words out of his mouth, I heard Harry call out, "Hey, Melissa, want to see something cool?" We all turned expectantly just in time to see Harry pitch backwards in the snow with his arms splayed out. "Oh yeah, really cool, turd money," Travis jeered. "You fell down. Way to go. Bet your mom's real proud." What did you just say? Harry stopped mid-Snow Angel. We all kind of felt silent for a second. Even Melissa just looked shocked. She pushed Travis's arm away and scooted to the other side of the tub, giving him a look of disgust. Too far, Travis, she muttered. Maybe he knew it too. I'd like to think he was going to apologize, but Harry was already getting up, and Melissa was already leaning out of the tub, trying to change the subject maybe, and asking Harry what he'd done. And then we all heard it. None of us seemed to know what it was at first. It was hard to recognize. A short, sharp sound, as if somebody had just been sucked in the gut. You know the sound you make when you've had the breath knocked out of you? It was like that. It's a snow angel, I said into the silence afterwards, trying to tell myself that it was just one of those weird sounds that came out of the woods sometimes. Oh. Melissa furrowed her brow. Hey, I think I've heard of those, Hunter put in. One of the kids from Moore got arrested for making one in the town square after the game. His parents had to come pick him up. Let's Google it. Inside, I was quick to suggest. But then the second sob interrupted me before I could get further than a few steps toward the house. What was that? Joanne asked. Harry finished climbing to his feet and stooped to pick up the pong ball. I didn't hear whatever Harry's response was. I was too busy looking. Frozen in place, riveted by the sight of the single pale hand draped across the edge of the snow angel's wing. This time we all heard the wail and knew exactly what it was. The identical looks of confusion and fear that flickered across all of our faces gave it away. What the fuck? Travis said. Oh my god! Joanne shrieked. Harry! I yelped. I don't have any conscious memory of crossing the deck. I blinked and suddenly I was there, leaning over the railing and grabbing him by the shirt, hauling him away from the snow and toward the steps. Meanwhile, an ethereal vision was rising out of the snow angel, as if it were rising on a pedestal. Blonde hair coated in frost, pale skin mottled with blackened spots. Blue lips bowed in a grimace of misery. She was wearing a brittle gray robe. It cracked as she climbed from her knees to her feet. What the fuck, what the fuck, what the fuck? Travis was wheezing a new mantra somewhere behind us. Get in the house, someone yelled. I held Harry's arms, helping him climb over the railing. We raced into the house hand in hand, a frenzy of splashing and screaming going on around us. I sprinted as far as the couch before Harry dropped my hand and went back to lock the glass door. Nicole and Joanne huddled against the far wall, sobbing softly. Melissa ran to the kitchen. Travis hovered near the window, staring in shock. The fuck is that? He squealed. I wanted to cover my eyes, but I couldn't help but look. I was drawn to that face, the look of terror and pain in it. I could still hear the sobbing through the glass as it tottered unsteadily to the steps and began to drag itself up onto the deck. Yet, she moved so wrong, so stiffly. Oh, God, Harry muttered beside me. I managed to glance at him, only to see him looking back at the snow. Not the thing, but the place it had come from. There was another hand edging out of the snow angel. This one wrinkled and shriveled. We have to get out of here. Melissa came out of the kitchen, carrying a kitchen knife. We have to get back to town and call the police. Harry's place was brand new. The landlines hadn't even been hooked up yet. Yeah, I agreed. Just one problem, Harry put in, lifting a hand and singling out the keys and phone sitting out beside the hot tub. Travis's keys. Joanne's and Nicole's, too. They all shared a look because they only left 2 cars. My beaten-up Suburban, which barely had heat, Not usually a huge problem, since I was typically dressed well inside it. But given that half the party was still soaked from the hot tub and wearing only their bathing suits, and Melissa's coupe, which would barely fit 4 people, even if they sat on each other's laps. Fuck, Hunter yelled. I don't think we got a choice. I ran my fingers through my hair. Just grab some coats and blankets and go. Hypothermia has to be better than whatever's gonna happen when they... Harry interrupted quickly. I didn't bother to respond to that. Just dug my keys out of my jacket and headed to the door. Heard others scrambling to grab what they could and following. As soon as I was out the door, I heard the howling. Not like wolves. Like people. More than one. Just screaming. I sprinted down the driveway, half aware that I ought to have waited. I'd have given the others more time to get ready. But some part of me just knew that every second we wasted was a step closer to death. And I wasn't kidding when I said our chances were probably better for recovering from hypothermia. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Melissa and Travis make it to her car. Nicole right behind them. Chad, Hunter, and Harry and Joanne were hot on my heels. I didn't have to bother to unlock the doors. The Suburban predated electronic locks, and the town was so small that normally I didn't bother locking them all individually. We scrambled in so hard that it rocked. The old shocks squealed and squeaked in protest. I dove into the driver's seat and slammed my key into the ignition, ignoring the seatbelt and everything else while the others dragged themselves in and hauled the doors shut behind them. I didn't do a head count before peeling out. It came back to me later. It was a miracle no one got left behind. If they had, it would have been my fault. I still feel guilty about that. I saw them coming around the corner of the house in the rearview mirror. Not my friends, but the corpses. I was full on panicking. Every heartbeat felt like a punch to the ribs. My breath felt like razor blades. I was so sure that I was going to puke as I swung onto the highway. Already doing 80. Before we'd done half a mile. John was still sobbing in the back seat. Hunter was crying too. I think I would have joined them if I hadn't been too busy shaking. Does anyone have a phone? Chad asked. It was a great idea. I glanced at him in the rearview mirror and saw him covered in an old blanket I kept in the truck bed. His hair was trying to frost. He had a cell phone in his palm. I started to ask what was wrong with it when Joanne chimed in, "Yeah, but no bars." "I'm going straight to the police station," I said. Being that I was the one driving, no one else had much say in it. "What if they don't believe us?" Joanne whispered. "They're going to," Harry said woodenly, staring straight ahead. "They made him illegal for a reason." "Why didn't they tell us?" Hunter demanded. Nobody answered. Guess no one had an answer. It was a tense, long period of silence, during which I checked the rear-view mirror a dozen times. Not just checking for weird frozen zombies, but for headlights. Where was Melissa's car? My old Suburban couldn't have been that much faster. My palms were sweating and prickling on the steering wheel. I tried not to think about it or draw any attention to it. It's 15 minutes into town. Part of me was hoping to get pulled over by a cop, but as was typical, there was no one around when I wanted one to be. There was never one around when I wanted one to be. I kept looking for them, even as we barreled into town and into the safety of the slushy gray parking lot of the sheriff's department. I nearly drove right through the front doors. The whole car lurched from the force of that stop, but I hadn't even slammed into park before the others were scrambling out of the doors and pouring into the station, like a biblical flood of half-frozen, half-dressed teenagers. Everyone was talking at once. I was lost to an end, keeping an eye on the window and the road before others babbled at Ollie, the receptionist. He was a nice old man in his 50s, at least. I could tell he understood about zero of what was being said. Until Harry stepped forward and put his hands on the desk anyway. Everyone else finally stopped talking. "I made a snow angel," he stated, calmly, factually. If it weren't for how pale his face was and how tight his bloodless lips had become, I would have thought he was calm. Ollie's face fell. His chair clattered as it rolled back, allowing him to stand up. I'll go get the sheriff. I knew then that it was every bit as serious as we thought it was. We hadn't imagined any of it. It wasn't some case of mass hysteria or something. There's something else, I added, pausing to look at the window, hoping to see Melissa's car pulling in at the last second. It never did. I haven't seen Melissa, Travis, or Nicole since we left the house. Ollie's expression turned graver, if that were possible. The sheriff was Melissa's and Nicole's father. He turned and hustled to the back faster than I've ever actually seen him move before. It was a tense moment. A hushed exchange of words and rising voices. Then Sheriff Basket came striding down the hallway, bigger than life. He was a massive wall of a man, and all of us had been a little intimidated by him. He'd never been mean exactly, just stern, quiet, had a direct, down-to-earth way of dealing with things, and that usually involved as few words as possible. How many were there? Case in point. I didn't understand what he was asking at first, but Harry got it straight away. 2, but I think a third was climbing out when we left. I watched Ollie getting some emergency blankets and jumpsuits out of the back for the others. For Chad, anyway. Hunter, Joanne, Harry, and I were all more or less dressed. Ollie passed me a blanket anyway. I mumbled a thank you. What did the first one look like? The sheriff demanded. It was a woman, Joanne shouted. Her voice sounded ready and thin. Reedy and thin. I thought maybe she was on the verge of hyperventilating. She had on this dress thing, Chad added, more subdued. She was blonde, I think. It's hard to remember. She was pretty, Hunter whispered, sinking into his blanket and at the wall at the same time. She looked so sad. The sheriff looked visibly relieved, but his eyes were still tight with stress and concern. He looked gray, actually. His skin, his hair, even his eyes. I didn't blame him. I was only a teenager myself at the time, but I could already sympathize. I understood the terror he must have felt, knowing his kids were out there, in danger, not knowing if he'd arrive in time or what may have befallen them. It could be worse, he muttered to himself. I don't think we were meant to hear. You kids stay here. Ollie, call their parents. You're at the Olsen place, right? He pinned us with a severe look. I nodded. I'm pretty sure the others did too. I heard one or two meek yes sirs. Your parents can explain when they get there. Those last few words were so clipped and bitten off that I could hear his teeth click at some of the syllables. I, for one, was not about to argue. I wanted to see my mom and dad more than anything in the world in that moment. I was still young enough that, for me, they represented the epitome of safety. Nothing bad could happen to me when my parents were there in my adolescent mind. They were still invulnerable giants, the axis upon which the world turned. I watched in silence as he checked his revolver and then went to the munitions room and came back with a shotgun and a box of shells. He walked out into the night without even a nod in our direction. His eyes were already on the road. He looked to me like a man going to war, as if he wasn't sure if he was going to come back and was prepared to accept that. Resigned, but also determined. Come on, kids. While he spread his arms and herded us all toward the back of the station. Let's get you warmed up. If any of you have a working phone, now's the time to go ahead and call your parents. It'll be better coming from your number than the police station's. Those of you who don't... sorry. He joked and pointed an ominous finger at the payphone on the wall and the stack of quarters beside it. He was a nice old man. He had a kind of beardless Santa vibe. But it was hard to ignore the tightness in his voice and around his eyes. Poor Ollie had to be pushing 60. He'd been working in the sheriff's department since I was a kid. Sometimes he came to help provide security at events in town. He'd never been anything but cheerful and friendly. Seeing him so pale made me feel helpless. What we'd seen at Harry's house still hadn't completely sunk in yet. And part of me thought that I was going to wake up any second and that it would all turn out to have been a bad dream. Around me, the others were calling their parents. Their phones ringing, a couple had already picked up. Voices were cracking. Muffled sobs and sniffles filled the open office space. I looked aimlessly between the desks for a while, my brain not having caught up to the idea. I should be doing what they were doing. Eventually my gaze drifted to Harry, only to find him looking back. It struck me then that he didn't have anyone to call. His mom was, well, he couldn't call her, and his dad was probably still on the plane. Which meant he didn't have anyone but me. I guess we should call Mom and Dad. I tried to smile, fumbling my cell phone out of my pocket. I'll be pissed if they're the last ones to know. Internally, I cringed. Why'd I said that? Especially after literally just thinking he couldn't call his dad. I know that feel, dog. I know that feel. Harry only nodded. My mom picked up on the second ring. I called her first because I figured she'd be the least likely to yank my ass to the phone to chew me a new one. I needn't have bothered, it turned out. We're on our way, she said before I could even say hello. Stay put. And then she hung up. But before she did, I heard keys jingling in the background and the car starting up. Cell phones were notoriously unreliable in my town. A text could be sent and hang in limbo for like a week before arriving at its destination. Calls often just failed to connect. I glanced down at the phone in my hand and up at Harry, running my fingers over the glossy screen. They're on their way, I reported. Harry just nodded again. The house was only 20 minutes away from the station on a bad day. My parents made it in 7. I guess that's where I got my lead foot from. Joanne and Chad's parents made it first, but only by a few minutes. Both sets swarmed their respective offspring. There was a lot of scolding and fussing and anxious questions. I couldn't help but think they looked like preschoolers, swollen, lost, and wide-eyed despite their ages. Maybe it was because I was feeling like one myself. Just a small kid on a big playground. Woefully out of my league. And my parents came rushing through the door. Mom's coat was barely on, unfastened and hanging off her. She stormed in. Dad's boots were untied. They looked like they'd dropped everything and run to get me. And I was so grateful for it. It was the most loved feeling I think a person could have. Dad rushed to me, but Mom paused mid-step and diverted to Harry. I wasn't jealous. I was weak-kneed with gratitude. Trust my parents, the adults, to know how to make right things. I didn't have the tools to fix myself. I learned a lot about empathy and maturity that day, watching my mom fuss over Harry as if he was her own. He'd been my best friend since childhood. He'd practically grown up in our house, and I in his. My parents were like the closest thing he had to his own at the moment. Maybe better knowing his parents like I did. She checked him over like the other parents were checking their kids, hands, face, arms, necks. Thank God you're okay, Dad said, catching me up and squeezing me like I was 9 again. I squeezed him back, fighting tears. They didn't touch you, right? You're all right? Mom was asking Harry. All I could do was nod, I assume. His eyes were suspiciously bright. It's okay, Mom said, giving him the same kind of hug Dad was just giving me then. It's going to be okay. Melissa and Nicole were in the other car, Chad half yelled. I know he was talking to his other parents, but all of them stopped and looked at another, sharing the look of horror and intense gratitude. How awful. But thank God mine are all right. Ollie said you'd explain when you got here. I wiped my eyes on the back of my sleeves and looked up at my father's face. His blue eyes were haunted and unhappy, but he nodded once. Yeah, I guess it's time. Normally we tell the graduating class after the ceremony. Mom looked up. They met eyes for a little while. Imagine they were searching for the words for a good place to begin. Why didn't anyone explain before? Joanne demanded. Why didn't anyone warn us? Let's start with the most immediate problem, my dad suggested when no one else spoke up. Tackle one thing at a time. First of all, what did the first thing look like? I don't know if it occurred to the others, but it struck me that this was the second time we'd been asked. And both times it had been the first question after asking if we were okay. She was blonde and pale and wearing a weird dress. Looks like she was in pain. I supplied, anchored by the presence of my parents. It seemed to me every adult in the room heaved a little sigh of relief. That's good. I mean, it's not great, but it's better than it could be, Mom muttered, wandering over to the pile of blankets on the desk and absently gathering one. I watched her bring it over to Harry to drape around his shoulders, fussing with the way it hung until there was no wrinkles to smooth out anymore. We'll start with that then. Dad took a deep breath. We call her the Angel. That's what our grandparents called her. I assume that's what their grandparents called her. Out of all of the harbingers, she's the least violent. She'll lead people behind her to the nearest, most easily accessible source of heat. Once they're all thawed, they'll go away again. As Dad explained, I absent-mindedly rubbed my chest. It hurt like I pulled a muscle. Harry looked up, expression going from numb and distracted to suddenly upset. Melissa's car. Adam's heat doesn't work. They must have... Dad looked grim but nodded. It's possible, especially if the doors to the house were locked. The good news is they wouldn't have hurt the others unless they tried to stop them. The bad news is, if the car stops running or the heat quits, they'll go back to trying to get into the house. Everyone took a moment to digest that. So, all they want is to get warm? I asked hesitantly. Yeah, Dad nodded. But only if the Harbinger is the angel. Okay. Chad looked up at his parents. But what are they? As far as we can tell, Chad's mom was a school nurse, a petite blonde lady with a "Can I speak to your manager?" haircut. These days we call that the Karen haircut. But as sweet as could be, answered this time. They were people. People who used to live here at some point. People who died in the cold. There can't be that many, right? Joanne suggested hopefully. It was a hope I didn't realize I shared until that moment. Surely one or two frozen zombies were a lot better than a horde. Thousands. Oh, a horde though. Dozens, at least 40. My own mother put in. She gave Harry a little squeeze and looked at me apologetically. I'm sorry, honey. There's others, but they don't all come out at the same time. Usually it all depends on the Harbinger, like we said. Usually it's no more than 8 or 9 at a time, but sometimes when the shepherd comes through... The who? The what? Travis cried, his voice warbling a high, awkward note that I thought he'd left behind in middle school. Harbingers are... Dad rubbed his fingers together, obviously searching for the words. They're like the leaders, only one comes through at a time. They're the first out through the gate when it's open, when the snow angel is made. Some of them, like the angel, are mostly harmless. Mostly. Then there are others... Mostly. There are 4 that we know of. 4 that we were told about. Her, the shepherd, the prophet, and the hermit. He walked away from me while he spoke, folding his hands behind his back and pacing over to the desk, and from there to the window. The angel comes with 8 or 9 others, who are mostly peaceful. They'll smash doors and windows if they have to, but so long as they're left alone and you don't attempt to harm them, they're harmless. They'll find the nearest source of heat and stay there until they're all warm again. I didn't want to think about that too hard. I hoped it was more supernatural than it sounded, because the way he put it made me think of a bunch of warming corpses in a room, and that made my stomach turn. The shepherd is one of the worst. He, we think, comes through with all of the followers. He's not content with just them either. He hunts down anyone he can when he comes through and will drag them out into the cold just to jie and join his herd. He sends others too, if he ever gets through. The only thing to do is start the siren and get into the bunkers around town. And then pray the barricades last until dawn. I start to shake just thinking about it. Imagining it made me feel cold inside. I shared a look with Harry, knowing he felt the same way. How close we'd come to that. What he had to be feeling, knowing that he'd almost let that through. Then there's the prophet. She won't outright hurt you, but if she finds you, it's hard to explain. She puts people to sleep in a way, mesmerizes them with a song. When you're under, apparently you have visions of the past, of things that happened in this town. Compared to the shepherd, that sounded like a cakewalk. But you're there until she's done with you, which could be hours. And wherever she catches you, which might be out in the cold or in the shower, or he left the rest up to imagination. Her followers put out the lights. They'll pull down electric lines and will smash lamps. Okay, that sounded less than ideal, but still a whole lot better than the zombie murder Woodstock. The hermit is the worst, though. My dad looked at Hunter's parents, and then Joanne's, and finally sighed like he didn't want to be the one to say the words. They come alone. And unlike others, they won't vanish at daylight. They keep hunting, keep killing, following people of the town, no matter where they run until sacrifice is made. My parents thought that might be where the new harbingers come from. Sacrifices to make the hermit go away. That's horrible, Joanne gasped. I cringed, too. It was awful to think about. Deliberately selecting someone you knew, someone you lived with, to go die. And making that happen. Killing them was in the worst way I could imagine. How do you even begin? But it's just the angel this time, Hunter said, his voice shaking. Yeah, my dad nodded. Should be gone by morning. So that was it then. We just had to make it till morning, and everything would be okay. Right? It wasn't, though. In fact, I can confidently say that it was the beginning of the end. The slow roll into the destruction of the town, and the majority of the people who lived there. For a time it was quiet. A few of us managed to fall asleep, either on the padded benches, the holding cells, or the chairs lined up against the walls. Still wide awake, watching the window with Harry and clutching a cup of hot cocoa for warmth. The hands of the clock barely seemed to move. And then, with a pop and a crackle, the dispatch radio came to life. It was the sheriff. I didn't understand the codes he was using, but I got the gist of it pretty good from everything that was said in between. Multiple 123s, more units required, send to medical and the blasters. After that, it was a flurry of voices and sirens. Orders were being shouted, sirens blared, while he sat behind his desk and closed his eyes. His lips moved silently, tracing the words of some prayer. I reached for Harry's hand, but the look in his eye, he was practically on the moon. So far away I couldn't reach him. We both knew that it was going to be bad. We didn't know how bad. We didn't know how bad until one of the officers started talking. We've got 2 injured juveniles en route to the hospital. Clear the roads, provide escort where possible. Only 2. We've got eyes on them. 8. Angel is missing. Repeat, the Angel is missing. 1 victim unaccounted for. All units respond. It went on like that for a while. The noise woke everyone up who'd managed to fall asleep. One by one we gathered at the window, watching for the flashing lights as they sped like shooting stars down the main road toward our tiny provincial hospital. Wondering who was inside, or if they would make it. Eventually, the noise from the radios died down to a chatter, back and forth between officers sweeping the woods. I gathered bits and pieces, but no more. Something about a set of bare footprints heading into the woods. Something else about a second, fresher set of tracks behind. Both vanished near the pond. The search went on, but nothing else important was said. Eventually, the first blush of dawn touched the sky. We watched it rise, Harry and I, side by side, as the first of the officers returned to the station, muddied and disheartened. The adults gathered in a huddle with them. I was meant to overhear, but my ears had always been sharp. Like the radio, now in person. I caught snatches that were just enough to paint a picture. Travis and Nicole. Broken arm, severe frostbite, should recover. Melissa, missing. Hold Lake, Angel. They told the rest of us a barely edited version of events a few hours later. Travis and Nicole had been found outside Harry's place. Travis had a broken arm. Both he and Nicole had pretty bad frostbite and were suffering from hypothermia, but were expected mostly to recover. Melissa was still missing. They thought the Angel's flock had mobbed the car while Nicole was still getting in. Melissa had gotten it started but hadn't driven away immediately because her sister wasn't fully inside yet. Travis had taken the passenger seat and Nicole couldn't get past him as he was too big. Well, the delay was enough for the heater to get started. The dead had converged on the heat, and when Travis tried to fight back, they tossed him aside like an old newspaper. Melissa must have run. She didn't know what we'd just been told. She probably thought they were being attacked. And that's what I would have thought. I did think. In the end, I guess it doesn't really matter why she ran into the woods. They never did find her. We all went home one by one. Harry's dad came home on the next plane, but understandably, Harry didn't want to stay in that house anymore. Moved away a couple months later. Not long after, Nicole and Travis finally got out of the hospital. Travis ended up losing the arm. Frostbite combined with a break made it impossible to save. They tried, but in the end, there was nothing to be done. Nicole recovered physically all right. She lost a few toes and a finger, but the real damage was psychological. Losing her older sister like that, the way it all went down, she was never the same. The rest of us got together after graduation, the same party where the town secrets would have originally been explained to us. Turns out there were a few things we still hadn't been told. I don't understand why anyone lives here at all, Jan was saying to Mr. Harkman, the man that had formerly been our math teacher for pretty much our entire lives. The town wasn't big enough that we really didn't need more than 1 or 2. There were rarely more than 30 kids per grade. I was standing by myself under a pennant banner, watching the flecks of light from the disco ball swim around the floor. She was going off to college next spring, and so was I. I think we all were except for Nicole and Travis, and Hunter, I think. He decided to stay behind, or maybe he couldn't afford college. I don't know, I never thought to ask. Most people do leave, Mr. Harkman sighed. I think we all tried to escape at one point or another. Escape? Chad, who'd been over in the corner beside Hunter, and a couple of other kids from our grade, lifted his head to ask. By then the story of that night had spread to every kid in our tiny high school, regardless of the grade. I can't help but think that it was a good thing. Well, why'd they come back? Joanne demanded heatedly at the same moment. Her face was flushed. Her eyes were glittery. Your parents didn't tell you? Mr. Harkman looked surprised and then just sad. I'm sorry, I guess I can see why. The thing is, you can leave town just fine until you have kids. And then the town pulls you back. Things happen. You lose your job, you have an accident, your plane or bus gets rerouted. You black out and you wake up back here in town with your kid. It's inevitable. If you try to leave, you end up back here again. Hush fell over the room. I don't know if they were thinking the same thing I was, but my very first thought was, I'm never having kids. Poor Harry. If only anyone had told him. And with that, my voice is on the edge of giving completely out. Ta-da! Yeah. Ugh. And this thing is running out of charge. Ugh. It would do me well not to strangle myself. Oh, I just said. There we go. Nope, that's worse. Hold on, chat. There we go. 11:20. I'd say that was a good 2.5 hour stream. But I grow tired. And so do my eyes. Hold on. Why are you not revealing to me what I need to know? Oh, there we go. Snowy. Not too spook, but interesting? I would say it's interesting, yeah. But we'll have more next week. And if you guys have any requests, I'm always... always open to them. I missed these. This is good. Probably more potions or mahjong tomorrow. We'll see how I feel. I've been working my ass off. Thanks for the spooks. Hey, thank you guys. But yeah, in the meantime, do not eat or drink any questionable substances. Make smart decisions. Do not die. Dying is absolutely forbidden, and I will see all of you wonderful people at a later time. I missed you guys. Thank you guys for chilling out on a Friday night. Great stories.